Gentlemen, welcome to Destiny Education Hangin With the Fellas podcast with your host, Tawana.
Hey, it's Tawana with another edition of Hangin With the Fellas. It's good to have you here with us today. I am super duper excited to bring you an associate of mine who I went through a writing program with before I became the international bestseller. This gentleman that I'll be introducing to you today is also an international bestseller. His name is John Crane Welsby, and one of the reasons that we invited him on is because he's talking about a subject that's vitally important to your success as a male. And one of the things that we've been seeing, not just here in the US, but worldwide, is that more and more men are really struggling with mental health issues and understanding how to go get help and what to do and what path to take when it's just reached a point that they don't know what to do. So John Crane Welsby is the author of Debug Your Brain, the software engineer's guide to mental health. Mr. Welsby, John, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hi, Tawana. I'm doing well. How are you today?
I am doing excellent. I'm super excited to hear what you have to say and to tell the world about everything that you're bringing to them.
It's great to be here with you. Going through the writing program with you was fantastic. I've had that idea for a book in my head for a long time, and to finally see it there on the Kindle store is amazing. It's a fantastic feeling to have a book out in the world that people can access.
And how does it feel to be an international bestseller?
It's a milestone. I love it. It's something I'm very proud of. I think it'll help people, and it's just a great achievement. And I'm so glad that through this process, we didn't do it alone.
I'm so glad that you're here. Tell us a little about what prompted you. What did you go through, if anything? Was it you or someone you loved who had to deal with the mental illness?
So it was me. Growing up, I absolutely loved video games. My dual passions were technology and stories, and video games is the intersection of those 2 points. So I loved writing software. I loved working with computers. When I went off to university at the tender age of 17, I studied software engineering, and it went quite well. And I landed this fantastic programming job in Sydney. I was a young man in the big city. I was, running around, doing all sorts of things, going out, having fun. Less than 2 years, I started experimenting with drugs, and it very quickly went downhill. I realized something was wrong. I understood at some level that I was having problems, but one day, I remember exactly which day. It was August 31st, 2007. I was at work. I was pretty sure they knew about my drug use. They knew about my erratic behavior, and they decided they were going to sack me. They were going to fire me. So they called a meeting in the boardroom, and the CEO called me up, and he said, you're fired. This is completely unacceptable. And what I remember is just absolutely screaming at him, just shouting at him, this company will go bust without me. I abused them. I swore at them. And it was just terrible. And I went home. I got high. I was screaming at the walls. I was shouting. I thought there were people in the next room. I thought people from my past had followed me, all sorts of completely unrealistic things. And I realized I had a serious problem. I realized something was really wrong. So I called my parents and I said, I have a drug problem. You need to come and help me. So they got into the car. I think it was at about 1 a.m. and they drove from Canberra to Sydney, which is about a 4-hour drive, to come and get me. And they did that at 1 a.m. They picked me up. They took me home to Canberra, and in the next few days, I was admitted to the psychiatric facility. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and my recovery began. It was an extremely difficult time. Schizophrenia is an extremely difficult illness. I was hearing voices, and I had religious delusions as well. And those religious delusions were very persistent. And people can show you why what you believe is incorrect, or what you're experiencing is not quite right. But the mind, the nature of the illness is the mind can't quite process it. So my anxiety levels were off the charts. I was worried about gangs hunting me down. I couldn't stop smoking cigarettes. I was chain smoking all the time. And it was just just a horrible, horrible time. And I realized that this was going to be a long haul illness. I was hoping that it would resolve pretty quickly, but no, I was definitely going to be in this position for quite some time.
Wow. What kind of thoughts went through your head as you processed the concept of a long time? Did it cause any additional struggles?
I wanted it to be over. I wanted to go back to normal. I wanted to go back to my job in Sydney and pick up where I left off. That was the desire. And I remember saying, I'm a software engineer. I want to be a software engineer. And I came to terms with the fact that I wasn't going back to my job. I wasn't going back to Sydney. Right now, recovery was my job. I was in the psychiatric facility for about 6 months. I was admitted, I was discharged, and then I was admitted again. The psychiatric facility, it's not a happy place. A lot of people are really, really struggling. And I just wanted to go home. I just wanted to be in a familiar place where I felt safe. Life had changed paths completely. What I expected was no longer going to happen. And now I have a new path to walk. So that was a big challenge, coming to terms with that.
Wow. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I will never claim to know it all. Isn't there schizophrenia and then drug-induced schizophrenia?
So that's a great question. So when I was talking to my psychiatrist, it's difficult to know. The human brain is incredibly complex. I'm fairly confident that my drug use contributed, and some drugs are quite notorious for causing mental problems, methamphetamine in particular. I was using a lot of marijuana. So it's quite possible that the drug use contributed to it. So I was willing to quit. I was willing to cooperate with the doctors and the treatment and take medication. But it's a real blow to your self-esteem when you realize, oh, I'm an addict. I went from being this successful hotshot software engineer to an unemployed drug user very quickly, and trying to rebuild yourself after that setback is challenging. I remember struggling with those feelings of low self-esteem, low self-worth, and I thought, okay, I made a mistake. These things happen. I'll get clean, and then my life will be sort of restored. And I certainly did get clean. Quitting the cigarettes was harder. That took a little bit longer. But I thought that if the drug use stopped, so would the illness. And that's what I was hoping for. And I'm certain that remaining clean was helpful, but nevertheless, the illness persisted for quite some time.
Now, where are you at today? How have you rebuilt? What kind of things have you moved on to since going through that experience? And what challenges did you have to overcome to get where you are today?
I really wanted to be independent again. And to me, that means working a job, living in my own house or my own accommodation, preparing my own meals. And that was hard. I applied for a number of jobs and I struggled to maintain work. I just really couldn't perform what was needed. And that was hard. Your intention is to work and you can't do it. That's a big setback. And now you have to try again. You have to find a different job. And hopefully this time will be better. No, same result. So getting back into the workforce was challenging. I'm so grateful for the support I've had, the family encouragement, but also, the doctors, the caseworkers, the psychologists, all of those people have really given so much to help me and assist me and to get me well. For my part, I think maintaining hope was important, because there are days when you just wake up and you're like, no more of this. I've had enough of abusive voices. I've had enough of being limited in what I can do and what I can achieve. I've had enough of feeling isolated. When does life start again? So I struggled with those emotions for quite some time. But I did cooperate with my treatment. There's a lot of stigma about mental health. I'm sure you're aware. I think a lot of people don't want to take medication. They don't want to see a psychiatrist. But I was willing to do all of that. I realized I needed the support.
Wow.
But hope, maintaining hope, I think that things will improve, things will get better. That's sort of what helped carry me through.
Were you able to maintain hope through all of this? Like, what were some of the things that fueled your hope, and how did you handle any letdowns that you may have had?
I was born and raised as a Catholic. I went through the Catholic school system, and there you get, the sort of introduction to Catholic theology, and you're introduced to the sacraments and Holy Communion and things like that. My mother is a very devout Catholic, so I, of course, at the age of about 17 or 18, started rebelling against that, and I had a very, very rebellious atheist phase when I was about 18 to 20. It made me reevaluate everything. It made me reevaluate, why am I here? What is my purpose? Something that really helped me continue was the belief that there was a greater cause, there was a bigger purpose, there was some sort of plan here that I had a role in, but was still getting ready for. So basically, I reevaluated my whole belief system, and that was difficult. You're in a sort of psychotic state, and you're hearing voices. It can be difficult to sort of discern what's good theology, what's genuine faith versus what's disordered thinking. But it was an opportunity for me to reevaluate. I looked at what I thought was important. I looked at how I hoped and believed the world could be. And I think the belief that there was a greater plan for me and that one day I would get through all of this, that spiritual component, I think is what helped me hold on to hope.
That's amazing. Tell us more about your book. Does your book detail this journey?
What I realized, and I went through a business coaching program, one of the great things you can do as a sort of entrepreneur or business person is to write a book. Okay, what do I know? I know a bit about mental health. I know a bit about computers. And then I had this wonderful mentor. I have an interview with her on my YouTube channel. We came up with this idea, debugging your brain. As a software engineer, when something goes wrong in the code, when the application's not working how it's supposed to, you slow it right down and you go through step by step by step, and you examine each individual variable, each little function, and you see what's happening. So I said, okay, maybe I can do that with my brain. So one of the first things I started doing was logging. So when you're working on a computer, the logs will tell you exactly what's going on.
Yep.
And there'll often be clues how to fix the issue. So I started a mood journal and I said, okay, today I feel depressed. Today I feel hopeless. And I don't want to be too negative, but there were a lot of negative emotions. But there were also days where I feel inspired and I feel hopeful. So keeping that journal, which I called my logs, that was an idea that I sort of came up with that compared the human brain to a computer. And, I started looking for things. Is there a value that you're expecting to be in a certain range and it's out of that range? So I started looking at things like hours of sleep I'm getting, minutes of exercise per day. How long am I spending on social media? How many days a week am I working? So I started examining some of those variables in my life and see if the values were something I expected. And then there was the sort of step-by-step analysis when, I'm experiencing negative emotions, when I'm struggling, what precisely have I done leading up to this? And that gave me some context. So the book itself, I'm not a mental health professional, but I am a survivor. So it's written from the perspective of someone who's battled mental illness for a long time and who's picked up some wisdom along the way, I think. So it's very practical. There's tips for remaining well, putting a care plan in place in case you become unwell. And it covers everything from sleep to hours worked, healthy relationships. And I use a lot of computing metaphors. For example, we have a firewall in our network. The firewall blocks unwelcome and negative connections. We can have a firewall in our life. When negative people come towards us, we can say no. When people try to take advantage of us, we can say, I'm not going to let you in. I look a little bit at the sort of the subsystems within the brain, the hippocampus, the cerebral cortex. I sort of compare them to the components within a computer, the central processing unit, the random access memory. So it's a guide from an experienced mental health consumer that uses a lot of computing metaphors and might be relevant to someone who's in IT.
I've had the opportunity to read your book, and one of the things that I really
Thank you.
My pleasure. It was actually really good. One of the things that I really did enjoy about it was that it really wasn't just for someone who was in IT. It's someone who deals with computers every day. Like if you are sitting at your desk working on them, you know what a firewall is because you have to be behind it. Because when that pop-up comes and all the trainings they go through, don't click the link in the email and different things that we have to go through to understand. And so what I loved about it was that even as someone who is not versed in computer science, I could still relate to the metaphors. I could still understand, when you were talking about, if I recall, one of the parts that I read was you were talking about how to just kind of go backwards. Correct me if I'm missing this, but what I understood was that you were kind of talking about going backwards. You have a bad moment, you have this time when something doesn't work, and so you have to remember the time where things were okay, and then kind of go backwards to walk yourself out of that darkness and back into the light. Did I explain that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And in computing, again, we have snapshots. Basically, when the system is working the way we want it to, when everything's up and running, we take a snapshot or a backup of that point in time. So if something starts to go wrong in future, we could restore the backup and hopefully things can go back to the way they were. Now, I understand that in life, going backwards isn't possible, but when things are good, that's when we can make preparations. That's when we can, have plans and strategies in place in case something does go awry. And that's the thing about life. If I've learned anything about life is that it doesn't go how you planned. So being prepared for challenges ahead of time, that's very useful to do.
So tell us more about what else you have going on. You have the book, and everybody, where can they get the book? Is it on Amazon or?
Yep. So the book is available on Amazon. You'll have to get it from your local Amazon shop. I'm in Australia, so it's amazon.com.au. In the US, it's amazon.com. I have a landing page at debugyourbrain.shop, and that'll give you a bit of detail about the book. That's my pitch, and it has links to the Amazon page where you can download it. So debugyourbrain.shop, that's where you can find the book.
And we'll make sure that those links are in the description on YouTube, and we'll put them in the transcript on the audio podcast so that you can find those as well. But now, John, is there anything else that you're up to these days? Anything else you're doing with this Debug Your Brain?
Absolutely. So I've called it the Morpheus idea, and you can see Morpheus is on the wall behind me.
For those who aren't sure, Morpheus is the guy from the Matrix.
The Matrix. Yeah, he's the captain of the hovercraft. The world is actually, we're in 2199. AI has taken over the world and humanity is enslaved to the machines. This movie came out in 1999, and I think it's incredibly relevant today. But this book here, Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces, the basic idea is there's a story called The Hero's Journey, and it's 12 steps. It was originally sort of conceived by Plato. Plato's a Greek philosopher, and he had this allegory of the cave. And Plato talks about someone facing a wall, and all they can see on the wall are shadows. There's a fire, and people are basically making shadow puppets. One of the people realizes that there's more to the world than just a wall. They leave the cave, they learn the true nature of reality, and then they return to the cave to tell the other people that there's more than just shadows on the wall. There's an entire world out there, and the people in the cave don't believe, because the shadows are all they've seen. The shadows are all they know. And this hero's journey story, we find it in just about every human civilization, and The Matrix is one version of it. And I love The Matrix, fantastic movie. Morpheus basically is a leader in the rebellion against enslavement of the machine. And he finds Neo, who is this hero character. He saves mankind, but Morpheus is the mentor figure, the captain who believes in Neo and allows Neo to fulfill his destiny. So I'm launching a coaching program. There is a free preview event that I'll be putting on. If you go to unplugandescape.net, that's where you can register. But the basic idea is that I will be Morpheus so that you can be Neo.
That's awesome. That's a great idea. When is your free masterclass?
Absolutely. Great question. So it's going to be a 12-week course. Each week corresponds to one of the 12 steps of the hero's journey. It's the preview event, Unplug and Escape. The first delivery of that you can join will be on June 18th. American people and global people are welcome to join, but we'll be working with Australian time zones. And in that event, I'll teach you some of the things that I've learned. I love that allegory of the simulation. In the Matrix, basically the world we see is not real. It's a simulation. The machines have created it to keep our minds occupied while we're actually enslaved to them. And I'll tell you a little story. So I live in Canberra. Canberra is the capital of Australia. Sydney's a very big city, but it's not the capital. And in Canberra, over the last few years, they've been building light rail or a tram. And the street that goes up and down the middle of Canberra is called Northbourne Avenue. And I've driven up and down Northbourne Avenue 1,000 times. When the tram was completed, they changed the speed limit. They lowered it from 60 to 40. That's kilometers. And I was driving home one day and I was going too fast. I was doing 49 and I got a speeding ticket. And I plead no contest. I should have been paying closer attention. I was going too fast. So, yep, I got a ticket. But the fine was $300. And when that happened, it was just an absolute slap in the face, because that $300, that was my disposable income for the month. After the rent and the bills and the groceries were paid, that $300 was what I had to enjoy myself. It was a hamburger and a night at the movies. It was a PlayStation game. It was a book and, maybe a date. It was what was in it for me. And when they just took it, that's when I realized I was a hamster in a wheel. That's when I realized I was part of a system that wasn't intended to serve me.
Right.
It was set up for me to serve the system. Yeah. I work hard, I do my job, that's it. So, and I feel a lot of men experience this. They work really hard at what they do. They try to provide, they try to serve, they really try to do the right thing by the people they care about. But the system we're in, I don't think is designed to make us happy. I think it's designed to make us productive. So we spend all this time working, and then there's very little else to actually enjoy the better parts of life. And, it doesn't have to be cruise ships and European holidays or whatever it is, just some quality family time, going to the beach or whatever it might be. We need to sort of disconnect, or at least understand the difference between our work and the lives that we have. And realizing, particularly for men, that we are responsible for our own happiness. Don't look to someone else to make you happy. You are responsible for your own happiness. And once you've got that worked out, then you can share happiness with other people. So getting out of this system that's designed to make us productive and sort of reinventing ourselves in a way that is more healthy, more connected, and more attuned to our own mental health and indeed spiritual needs. That's what I'm advocating. That's what I'm teaching.
And, it's really not just a system that is designed to make us productive, because if you think about it, the system doesn't actually make us productive. What it does is it deposits us into an institution of slavery. And what it does is then takes away drive. It takes away ambition. It's so funny to me because I've had numerous discussions with people and debates about weekend traffic. And I'm like, no matter 7 days a week in the San Francisco Bay Area here in the US, over in California, at 5 p.m., Sunday through Saturday, it's rush hour. People are so conditioned to being at work at a certain time. They all leave to go where they're going to go around the same time. They all go home around the same time. And I think that system is really detrimental to people. And one of the purposes of this podcast is to remind people that while it is a system, it is not the only system, and that throughout this process, you always have a choice. And so one of the things that I really loved about what you've been saying is that while you're having this discussion, you are still bringing to the surface, gentlemen, you have a choice. You don't have
Absolutely.
to be in this space.
And that's why I've got Morpheus up there with the red pill and the blue pill. If you haven't seen the movie, this is an important moment.
It is.
Basically, Morpheus says to Neo, this is your moment of choice. This is your last chance. You can take the blue pill and stay where you've always been, or you can take the red pill and things will be different. And I heard you use the word slavery. Tell me a little bit more. It sounds like this idea resonates with you. How do I describe it? They're sort of worker drones in a giant hive. Would you tell me a little bit more about what you've observed for yourself?
Sure. So if we go back into biblical times, one of the things we see is that everybody worked for themselves. They had to go out, they had to create their living. They did not get a steady paycheck. One of the most detrimental things that happened to our society was back in the industrial age when we started putting a bunch of people in factories to work. And we painted this image of how euphoric it was going to be and how amazing it was going to be. And it has not produced that. What it has done is it has destroyed the family. Fathers want to leave. It left every family where the father went to work and mom stayed at home in a single parent family. And a lot of people don't realize that reality, that from the time dad went to work until the time he got home, mom was a single parent. She had to make the choices. She had to make sure the kids got where they wanted to go. There was no help. And what we did was we metamorphosed the definition of help so that we could make it comfortable, that we could sell this idea to people that while they were sacrificing themselves for somebody else's gain, they didn't notice that their kids were becoming drug addicts, that their wives were off having affairs with different people because they felt alone and don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Like, I don't think that's an excuse to have an affair, but it doesn't change how people react to stress and the differences that people show. And so when I think about what has happened and I'm watching this current shift where we're going back to the land of working for ourselves and being freelancers and being people who bring in and generate income without having, top company A telling us what time to get there, what time not to. I worked in the, give me just one second, I just want to finish this off with this. I worked in recruiting for a minute, and there were some companies that got to the point I wouldn't place people because they were churn and burn, and they would run them 16 hours a day. What human body can stand on the feet for 16 hours a day and pump a product? And they didn't care. And they would drop as quickly as they needed to because, oh, you were 5 minutes late, you're done. After
Exactly.
16-hour shift? Really?
Yeah, really. Exactly. And I think that kind of system is just so unfair, but you won't be saved from it by the system. The system wants to keep you in. It is up to the individual to make that decision and say, look, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to focus on myself and the people I really care about. There is more to life than just the next paycheck. So absolutely, I totally agree with you. And I think, if you have a look at this book, Epic of Gilgamesh, there's so many instances of it. And what I argue is that the path of Christ was also a hero's journey story. If we agree that there's a God who can be known, it makes sense. The actions of that God are relatable for all people. And, speaking as a Christian, I've looked to Jesus to model my own sort of hero's journey. And that's sort of what I'm teaching. When I felt stuck in my life, I looked at the hero's journey and the path of Christ to see, okay, where am I stuck? What needs to happen next? There's the stage called Dark Night of the Soul, and this is absolute rock bottom. It's when you tried your best and you failed. The negative forces are winning, and you've been defeated, at least temporarily. And that's what I felt like for a very long time. And for Jesus, this was the passion, death, and the sort of period of darkness before resurrection. And the thing about the hero's journey is when you're in that place, when you are defeated and at the bottom and everything has gone wrong, what decision do you take? Do you give up? Or do you try again? Do you persevere? Do you find the strength to continue?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. And, the one thing I would want to add to what you were saying is just a reminder that when you're going through that dark spot, when you're in that very, very dark place, it's very important to be willing to listen when a hand is coming out for you. Like, you may not agree with the way that they were going to do it. I know from my own personal conversion, when the Lord found me,
I
showed up at the church to prove that this Jesus thing wasn't for everybody. And because of that ridiculousness of my thought, I ended up walking out of there being someone who was completely different than I walked into that building an hour ahead of time, and I've never gone back. And so we have to, in that darkness, that a real decision that we have to make is, do we want to move out of this, or do we want to let this be the end? If you're in that darkness at 18, is this really the end for you? Because you really haven't been alive that long. But are you willing to just trust that the person taking your hand is really trying to get you from where you're at to where you want to go as well? So don't be afraid in that darkness to look for the light, because it will show, it'll shine.
Absolutely. I so totally agree with that. And I'm curious, the first step of the hero's journey is the calling. When the mentor figure, or indeed this case Christ, calls to you and says, hey, come with me and I'll show you the way. And you use the words, when the Lord found you. How did the Lord find you, or how did you realize that you were being called?
Yeah, no, see, I didn't have any of that. I
didn't. Okay.
I always love when people have that conversation, because that wasn't my experience. Like, literally, I walked into this church on an invitation, going to prove that this Jesus thing wasn't for everybody. The woman I was with says, you want to go up? They did this altar call, and the woman I was with said, you want to go up? This is what you came for. And my mind was like, no, what are you doing right now? No. And I looked at her and I go, yes. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? And so I'm walking up to the front going, what is this craziness? And this is what's going on in my head, right? And so the pastor comes up. Don't ask me, John, what he said. I don't know. I didn't hear a word he said. My mind is like, listen, I don't know how you got up here, but don't you fall to the ground. And I'm like, I am absolutely not going to embarrass myself by falling to the ground. And so when he did put his hand on me, I don't know what he did. He was like, do you believe in Jesus? And I'm like, yes. And I'm like, no, you don't. What are you talking about? Like, what is wrong with me? Like, I've got this battle going on in my head. And I went to sit down, and no sooner did I hit that chair, and all of a sudden, that black hole that I had lived with literally my entire life was just gone. My first suicide attempt was at 5. With St. Joseph's Children Tylenol. Obviously, it wasn't very good. I had done repeated, I didn't understand why I was here. Everything I touched was a disaster. Nothing worked. If I would get an idea, I would head out to do it. But the first time I got hit with a hardship, I was like, oh my God, I can't do it. What am I thinking? And from that day forward, when I went back, the crazy thing was that I didn't understand what had happened. It wasn't until I was on my way back into Modesto, which is where I was living at the time. So I was in Stockton for this church, which is in California. I was on my way back to Modesto, where I was living at the time, and I had this cell phone company called Cricket. Well, Cricket didn't work outside of Modesto. And
Oh no.
have been trying to get a hold of me. And I pulled back into reception and I answered the phone, and all of a sudden, like nothing was phasing me. I wasn't buying into the drama. I walked into my house, and this guy we weren't a couple, we were friends, okay? He and I had been hanging out forever, and he's like, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I don't know why you keep asking me that. Nothing's wrong." And he's like, "No, no, something is different about you." And I was like, "I don't know what it is." And he asked me how he should handle this situation. I said, "You're gonna do da 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 da." He went home, he did da 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 da, and the situation was ended. And he called me up and I said, "That's great. I'm glad to hear that." And all of a sudden I felt this hunger. I was starving, but I wasn't starving for food. And I always liken it to like the awakening of a vampire, right? Because it's the only thing that I could explain, except I didn't want blood. I needed the word. And so I called this woman that I know and I said, "Hey, can I borrow a Bible?" And I drove down there. I mean, like it was a 30-minute drive. I made it in like 5. It was ridiculous. And I really wasn't speeding that fast. It was crazy. It was like God had just bent time. And I walked in and she goes, "What do you want with the Bible?" I said, "I just want to read it." And I didn't tell her anything. And she was like, "What's wrong with you? Something's different about you." And I said, "I have no idea." I went home and that was the first time in my life I have read a 700-page book from cover to cover in one night.
That's incredible. That's such an amazing story. I totally resonate. I'm so glad that you had someone there that you could go to. And going back to the beginning, you used the word, you had an invitation to go to the church. There was an invitation, wasn't there? So that was the calling. That was the step. You didn't have to take the invitation, but you did. So I really love that story, Twana, and thank you so much for sharing. But it can take on many forms.
Yes.
And everyone's will be a little bit different, but there is some commonality. You talked about that experience of reading the Bible. I remember when I was in the mental hospital, in the psych ward, I remember, and this was a key point, someone said to me, "Do you read the Bible?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he responded, "But you could if you wanted to." And it's those little moments, sometimes we hope God will appear to us in the burning bush or the voice from heaven. I feel that sometimes it's just that quiet little voice, particularly coming from another person, it's perhaps not even someone you know well, that sort of guides us, and we have to be willing to listen.
I want to take a moment, John, to tell you I am so honored that you came today because your story has been amazing. And I'm so excited about your book, Debug Your Brain, The Software Engineer's Guide to Mental Health. I love what you're doing with men and that you were given this opportunity to be able to get back into your right mind and to actually take what you experienced and to be able to give it to other men who are in similar situations. That's an amazing, amazing gift. And I'm so glad that this is a path you chose. Now, tell us the link again to get your book.
So the link for the book is debugyourbrain.shop. That will get you to the Amazon page where you can read the book, and you can read it in your web browser, on your mobile device, or on your Kindle device. Debugyourbrain.shop. And then if you want to get into the mentoring with me, it's plugandescape.net. So those two, debugyourbrain.shop, unplugandescape.net.
Beautiful. So we'll put those links in the description on YouTube and in the transcript on the audio version. So make sure you download that. John, thank you so much for joining us tonight or today. We are so excited that you came. Thank you for your time today.
It's a pleasure, Twana. Thank you so much for having me.